Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
You're audible.
So, hello and good evening, whatever, good afternoon, good morning, whatever, wherever you are from. So, greetings to you all. And we are completing the journey almost. So, eighth webinar. Today, the eighth session is there. And today, we will be talking about mainly about publication ethics, and we will also talk about a few more things. So, we have lined up a few things. So, we will start with, about how do you like go about submitting the manuscript with the importance of cover letter, and we will also look at formatting your manuscript, mainly complying with the instructions to authors, something about even formatting your tables, graphs, how do you present your data. So those things we will give you idea. Then also we'll give you some perspective from the reviewer's side, so reviewer and editors, and all of us happen to be reviewers as well. Praveen is one of the editors for one of the journals, international journal of health and allied sciences, which is under Medno publication, doing well. And even I'm one of the editors for some journals. So and then public, we have some experiences, same. We all review also, we are on editorial boards, so also Dr. Vijayalakshmi and Rashmi. So Praveen will give you that perspective, and we will also tell you a little bit about insight about how do you go about responding. So these things, and then I will just talk about publication ethics, mainly touch about the authorship issues, and some other things like salami and duplicate publication and things like that, and a bit about plagiarism. So this is what is the plan, and then we will have a kind of open house in the end, so that you have time to interact, and we try to keep today a little more time than what we usually have. So that's the idea. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Dr. Praveen Kulkarni, who will take you through these topics as I mentioned already. So over to you, Praveen.
Thank you very much, Animesh, sir. So, say next half an hour, we'll be discussing about the publication, what are editors and reviewers' perspective. Few things related to publication have been already covered last week. Dr. Vijay Lakshmi spoke about how do you design your manuscript, but the circus begins after that. So how I am going to structure the manuscript according to the need of the journal, and how I'm going to submit it, and how I will reply to the reviewers' comments, and how I'm going to succeed in the process of publication. Okay, so in next few minutes we'll be discussing about what is a publication process, what happens after I submit my manuscript, okay, and how the editor will look at your paper, and how the reviewer will look at your paper, and how you need to look at reviewers point of view, and how you need to reply to the reviewers comments. And finally we'll be discussing about few tips for successful publication. So first let me talk about the publication process, the review process. The author will submit the paper. So we are all the authors. We submit the papers to the journals based on our interest and based on what type of manuscript we have prepared. Animesh sir has already covered how we select the journal based on the requirement. After I submit the paper, the editor, it will come to the editor. Editor will have a look at the paper, and editor will have his own set of questions on the paper, whether this paper suits my requirements or not. What questions he's going to ask himself, we are going to discuss a bit later. Okay, first part is editorial review. Editorial review has got two important components. One is general editorial review, whether the article is up to the mark, it is more subjective in phenomena. And second is technical aspects, whether there are technical modifications required in this particular article. Based on that, the editor may reach a decision. Most of the time this decision is going to be a disastrous decision. Okay, an article from editorial review will not get accepted. Okay, so remember, if the article goes to the decision stage from editorial review, it means that there is a problem. And after that, the editor will, if there are technical modifications, the editor will send it to you for those technical modifications. You do those technical modifications and send the article back to him. Then editor will select the two editors, two reviewers for your article, and he will submit that article to those reviewers. So sometime if it is an open review policy, author is going to tell who is going to be my reviewer. Okay, and if it is not an open review policy, the editor is going to select the reviewer based on the credentials of the reviewer and his or her experience in the topic of your study. Okay, the reviewer is going to review the papers. It is a blinded review, and reviewer may give direct decision on the article. So this article is not fit, or this article can be accepted without any modifications. This possibility is also rare. Okay, and most of the time the external reviewer is going to give his comments or her comments, and those comments are conveyed to the author. Okay, and the author is going to make those revisions and then send it back to the journal, and the journal will send those modified manuscript to the reviewer back. We call it as external re-review. Based on the external re-review, the article will reach a decision. Either it is to be it will reach a decision whether it is to be accepted, or it again needs further revision. Okay, and the reviewers may not be happy with the way in which you have replied to their comments. They may want to give some more additional comments to you. Okay, and after you re-revise it, okay, so the decision is going to be achieved. This decision could be either accept the article or reject the article. Two categorical decisions. Okay, and if it is accepted, the article goes for language check. There are a set of people who are working exclusively on language and formatting, and they will do the language check, and based on that they are going to give you the author proof. Before publishing it full time, they are going to send you a proof, and once you approve that proof, then the article will get published. So this is the entire publication cycle. Okay, and if it is rejected, I will not tell you what to do. You need to go and submit the article to the new journal. Okay, there are multiple journals. You can go to the other journal and submit the article. Okay, please keep in mind, when you are submitting the rejected article to some other journal, please keep in mind what reviewer suggestions have been received. Make the modifications based on that. Usually the common practice is, at first time when we are submitting the article, we submit it to a very high impact journal. And when the article goes to the high impact journal, the reviewers are going to review it. They are going to give their comments. You incorporate those comments and then submit it to a next higher impact journal. So the process goes on. So this is a long process. We need to remember that this entire process may take from 3 months to 1 year or 2 years. Okay? We need to be very patient with this particular process of publication. So when the article comes to the editor, when I look at the article as an editor, first thing is my subjective sensation related to the article. Number one, I will ask, does this manuscript come under the scope of my journal? Please read, whenever you are submitting article to a journal, read what is the scope of that particular journal. For example, the journal in which I am the associate editor is the International Journal of Health and Allied Sciences. We do not accept articles related to the Ayurveda science. So that doesn't come under the scope of our journal. So if I get any article related to Ayurveda, I will just write to the author that this article doesn't come under my scope. Please submit it to some other journal which encompasses this particular kind of a scope. First question that will be asked is whether this article comes under the scope of my journal or not. Next is, what is this type of manuscript? Is it an original article, review article, case reports? There is a common feeling that original articles take a longer time and the review articles will get more citation. So, meticulously done review articles are major attraction to the editors, and also the case reports. Okay, so we usually, as the editors, we look at these components, which type of article it is. But usually when we are finalizing the issue, we give adequate proportion to each of the category of articles. And most important thing is there any new message in this entire paper, or it is beating around the same bush? Okay, so whether there is a new message that is emerging out, maybe editor's role is very important. They are going to spend a lot of time on the journal. They are going to read almost all the manuscripts. Okay. And then we will decide, the editor is going to decide how this article is going to add value to my journal. If this article, for example, now the COVID era, if any article that focuses on the treatment aspect of COVID, editors are more fascinated about those articles. I myself has written, I have written to few of the authors when they submitted papers related to the treatment outcomes using a particular drug. I take it personally, and we communicate to the reviewer, authors, what all modifications are to be done, and we are more eager to publish them. Because I know that if I publish that article in the journal, my journal will have larger number of citations. So my journal will have its improved impact factor. So that is the reason we usually keep, if this article is going to add any value to my journal, we usually rate the articles to what extent this article is going to add value to my particular journal. And next, is this study ethically conducted? Whether the components of the study are under the ethical grounds. I think a lot has been covered in the last session. Okay, and sir is also going to speak about publication ethics a bit later. Does the paper align with most happening topic of the current period? This is another important thing. The articles which are more related to the happening. Now it could be COVID, it could be TB, drug-resistant tuberculosis. It could be, related to the leprosy. When the things are happening, the topic which is most happening at that particular period of time, those articles which are, aligned to that, there are more chances of acceptance. Okay. Next is, does it attract authors or readers if it is published? If my article, I will be looking at my journal. My journal is my baby. I want to, I want that baby to be fully nourished. What are the factors that improve the nourishment of my journal? One is the citation. Second is readability. Third is subscription. Next is the impact factor. How all these things are going to happen? Only if people read my journal. So I will be looking at all these components when I'm looking at the journal. Okay? So these are very important things when you are structuring your manuscript and when you are submitting to the people. So please keep in mind how editor is going to think about your article. And there could be a lot of technical aspects for sending the article back. Okay, whether the article is written in the prescribed format. Sir has told yesterday, Dr. Vijayalakshmi has also told in the last session about IMRAD format, whether it is in the IMRAD format or not. And case reports, we don't expect them to be in the IMRAD format. Review article format is different. Whether the article the people have submitted, is it in the prescribed format of my journal or not? By just looking at the article without reading it fully, we can easily make out whether the authors have read and understood the instructions to authors properly or not. Because we review multiple papers. So for example, we review in our journal, I review minimum 5 to 8 articles a week. So you just imagine my journal is 9 years old. So look at the way we got exposed to those articles. The editor's eyes are very, very sharp. I'm not boosting myself. Every editor for that matter. So they are very sharp. They'll identify whether the author has read the instructions carefully or not. Based on that, we'll rate the authors. Okay. And if whether the authors have maintained anonymity about the affiliations, most of the time we see authors will write their name, in the article file. It would have been explained very well in the instructions to author segment that authors should not reveal their name, their institutions, affiliations, anything. It should be in a totally blinded format, but still authors mention it. So that is another reason we send the articles back, not rejection. We send the articles back with for the technical modifications. Okay. Whether the word limits of abstracts and tables, figures are maintained or not. Usually, most of the journals will expect the abstract word limit to be around 250. Okay, so if it is an original article, we expect it to be around 3000 words. And sometime what happens is, people nowadays have got a habit of converting the dissertation into publication. When you ask your PGs, you have to write a paper about it. What PG is going to do, he's going to copy all 20-30 tables he has got in his dissertation, and he's going to put it in the paper. I don't blame the postgraduates. The problem is they are not trained in that way. Okay, so what we expect is for every 500 words, please remember this, for every 500 words, one table or one figure is accepted in most of the journals. Some of the international journals will accept these tables and figures as an annexure. They don't put it in the main paper. They put it into the annexure. Okay, so there also they allow around, for every 600 words, they are going to allow one table or one figure. Please remember this when you are structuring your papers. Okay, and whether the references are cited correctly or not, Dr. Vijayalakshmi told about this a lot in the last session. Whether there are formatting errors, I'll tell you one more important problem we face. The student prepare the paper, or one of the junior colleague or someone in the department will prepare the paper, initial draft. He or she will circulate to the other author panel. Every author would have made some change. They would have marked it in some specific font color. Okay, and they would have sent it back to the corresponding author, and the corresponding author should address all of them and remove those track changes and colors and then submit it to the journal. But most of the time what happens is those comments, whatever they have given, the color changes, the track changes, everything will be there in it, and the articles is submitted. Sometimes the copy paste thing, whatever we practice, so copied and pasted from some published literature, so the font is different, the color is different, the same original reference numbers are there in the paper. So these are all the problems. I'm not exaggerating anything. These are the things which we see day in and day out. I want to look, as an editor, I want to see whether IEC clearance has been obtained or not. We never used to see this initially. For my journal, we used to give it to the authors. And second, another thing is, sometimes when the people are submitting the papers, ethical clearance requirements are there in some of the journals. But in my journal, we were a bit, if the person has not written about it and he has submitted IEC clearance, we were okay. But now, after the Scopus has made us to be on our toes, and every paper we have been given a mandate that editor should ensure that in every paper there should be ethics clearance statement. Along with that, the IEC clearance letter number from the institution, that has been made mandatory. If we want to compete to go for Scopus and PubMed, we need to adhere to these requirements. So I want to look at it. If it is not there, I'll straight away send the article back to the authors to mention all these things and send it back. And whether appropriate weightage has been given to each component of the manuscript. Introduction will be 2.5 pages. Material and method will be one small paragraph of 10 words. Results is another 2 pages. Discussion is one small paragraph. It shows that adequate proportionate weightage has not been given to all different sections of the manuscript. They should be proportionate. Okay, so that thing we look at the initial review. And then whether the funding resources have been acknowledged or not, and the conflict of interest. These are few things that we usually look into when we are reviewing the article for the first time. This is on-table review for the editor. Okay, I have not come to the reviewer section yet. I'm still wearing the cap of the editor only. And as an editor, I will see these declarations from the author, whether their copyright form has been submitted with a signature from all the authors. Okay, and author agreement has been submitted. Some journals consider copyright form itself as an author agreement, and some journals will want it separately. And the title page has been given or not. Okay, so the title page will have a cover letter, checklist, details of authors and affiliations, contributors form, details of corresponding author. Corresponding author is a very, very important person in the entire process of manuscript, because he or she is the one who will be taking the whole responsibility of the paper on his or her shoulder and running the entire show. Whether the word counts are mentioned, declaration. Of the conflict of interest, I'll just show you one of the cover letter. The cover letter will have something like this. The cover letter which you, if you are a HOD or if you are a faculty in the department, when you are submitting some paper to the principal or to the university, you follow this cover letter. Similar cover letter is given. So most of the journals will specify what cover letter we need to submit. It will have the title of the paper, type of the manuscript, okay, and on behalf of us, we are requesting you to publish a requesting statement and the details of corresponding author. Okay, so I will tell you one common flaw usually authors do over here. I submit my article. The first time I'll submit the article to this journal, Clinical Epidemiology and Global Health, and it got rejected and came back. I will keep all these title pages and all in my one of the folder. Next time I want to submit the same article to some other journal. At that point in time, I have to change this journal editor, which journal editor you are addressing. I get many articles without mentioning the name of our journal or mentioning the name of some other journal. Okay, so people, we need to be, these are all the points where, editor, with the first moment I'm going to get an idea that this article has got rejected by someone else and it has come to me. So then my moral of this entire manuscript will come down. This is what we call as contributor form. And in contributor form, every author has to put his signature or her signature with the dates mentioned. This will give a clear indication to the editor that every author has read the article and approved it. And also this is going to give right to the journal to utilize your scientific work in their journal. Okay, sometimes we don't give much concentration to it, and we have seen people doing signing for other authors. So those things are all happening nowadays with the COVID thing. People are submitting the electronic signatures. Okay, but electronic signatures are also accepted to some extent if the authors, usually what happens is when you submit a paper nowadays to any journal, you will be entering all the details of other author panel. So the moment you submit the article to the journal, the message will go to each of the authors that this article has been submitted and you are one of the author in it. Okay, you need to approve whether you are really an author into it or not. Some Elsevier journals, some journals in Springer, the person, every author in that particular author panel should approve that I am author of this particular article. Okay. This is a contributor checklist. What has been contributed by whom? Whose concept is it? Who has designed the manuscript? What are who has the intellectual context? Who collected the data? Who did the literature search? Who created the first draft? Who reviewed it? The whole component will come into it in the contributor form. Last week, we were discussing about International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, right? So this is a contributor component that we usually keep in mind when we are deciding on the authorship, but most of the journals demand for it. I want to know what is a contribution of each of the author. Okay. Some journals want declaration of conflict of interest. You need to tell, I have no conflict of interest. These are the formats that are available with the journal itself. Okay, and this is a title page of the journal which will have the title. Then there will be something called running title. Someone was asking in the first session itself, what is running title? Okay, you need to mention what is your running title, and then contribution of each contributors list. Then you are going to mention the corresponding authors details explicitly. Please mention, do not forget to mention your phone number there. Sometime, the articles remain with us for years together, and the review authors will not communicate the reviews back to us. They won't revise and they won't withdraw the articles also. Sometime we had to call up those authors and ask, kindly take a decision on your author, whether you want to, on your paper, whether you want to continue with us, whether you want to withdraw your article. Please let us know, because you are neither replying to the reviewer comments nor you are revising the article, and you are keeping it in your inbox. Okay, so that will reduce the journal performance. Okay, because people are keeping an eye on our journal. What is the rate of submission? What is the time taken between the first submission and the revision? What is the time between revision and re-revision? What is the time between re-revision and acceptance of the decision? So these are all the time periods every indexing agency wants to know about it. So please mention all these details. So now let me wear the hat of a reviewer. If I am reviewing the paper, what all things I would like to look at? First thing, why on this earth I should review this paper? Does it come under my area of interest? Sometimes the editors will randomly select the reviewers and send it to them. And there is an option for the reviewers whether they want to accept review process or not accept review process. They will usually look into the abstract and decide, okay, whether it comes under my purview or not. I will accept the review. If not, I will not accept the article. Sometime I have lot of papers to review. I cannot give justice to this particular paper, so I will not review this paper. Most of the time, people will accept the paper when it is very close to their heart. For example, if any paper comes to me on rabies, I will accept it closing my eyes because rabies is my area of study. So point is, when you are doing review, when the reviewer is going to review the paper, first thing he is going to look whether it comes under my purview or not. Second thing is there any novelty in the study? But by the way in which the title is written, the abstract is written, it itself is going to tell whether there is a novelty in the study or not. Next important thing that most of us will look at as a reviewers is whether the ethical standards are mentioned or not. And next is whether it is in the prescribed format. These things I have told, just I'm going to skip them. And is a paper going to add any other new information to the existing pool? And then most important thing is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the paper? I'll tell you the problem. We will send article to the reviewer. Reviewer wants to say that I have reviewed 200 papers this year. He will or she will accept the review process, and just write 2 lines about the entire manuscript. I don't blame the credibility. I don't question the credibility of the reviewers, but this happens. Okay. So what we usually ask is, nowadays, whenever the paper is submitted, sent to a reviewer, we want to ensure that the reviewer has read the entire paper and came to a decision. For that, we ask the reviewer to write what are the strengths of this paper and what are the weaknesses of this paper. Only if the reviewer has read all those things, then he is going to explain it. Otherwise, no. So please give a scope for the reviewer to mention about your strength and weaknesses of the study. The reviewer will look at all these components. The title, I don't want to go into the details of any one of them, because in last session, elaborately, Dr. Vijayalakshmi has covered all these things. Whether the title is in line with Dr. Vijayalakshmi's recommendations, whether abstracts are in line with Dr. Vijayalakshmi's recommendations, whether introduction is in line with whatever she told, methods are in line with whatever she told. Okay, so now we have got very structured checklist. Someone was asking in the initial first day of the presentation, first day of the webinar. So what are all the different checklists for critically assessing a paper? There are many. For example, if it is a observational study, we have got something called Strobe checklist. And if we have something called a randomized control trial, we have something called consort statement. If it is a systematic review or meta-analysis, we have Prisma. Okay, so you can, sometimes reviewers will have their own checklist. Okay, so whether these things are being covered there or not in a more meticulous manner, the reviewer wants to see about it. Animesh sir asked me to talk about the result component. This is the heart of entire study. Okay, how you present your results. I'm just going to take another 5 minutes in describing how the result section has to be written. The result, whenever we write the result section, we have got a very bad tendency that I will directly come to the point. If my study is on prevalence of hypertension in a rural community, my first line in the result is, in the present study among 250 individuals included, 35 were having hypertension. Who were they? I want their description before. I want the general characteristics of the research subject. That should constitute your first paragraph. What are the general characteristics of the study subjects? And then come to objectives one by one. And then talk about the specific results. Then put your tables and graphs. Don't directly jump into the results related to the objectives. It becomes something like that. Something like, without introducing yourself, you start, describing your achievements. Okay? Very important thing is identify what are all identifying features, general characteristics of the study subjects, then only describe about the characteristics. This is how we write the general characteristics of the patient. If you read it, so this is from one of our article published. So we usually preserve the first paragraph for the general characteristics. Among these many subjects, this was a common age group. These many were the males. Common gender. What was the education status? A common one. Do not describe elaborately. One small paragraph describing about the study subjects. And please remember, when you write the mean, also put the standard deviation along with that. Do not give only mean to the in the results section. Okay, I think you have understood it. The first paragraph should have the general characteristics of our study subjects. Okay, if you just look, this is another example. So we describe what were the characteristics of my study subjects. Simple socio-demographic characteristics. What was the age distribution, gender, education, occupation, marital status. They're from rural areas or urban areas. What was their socio-economic status? Those things we usually put it in the results first. Okay? And after that, we align the results with the objectives. So where the reviewer is going to find the objectives. If I do not have much time to read your entire introduction, I will read last 4 lines of your introduction section, which is going to tell me the objectives of your study. Please remember, when you are writing your manuscript, ensure that the last 2 or 3 lines of your introduction section will have your study objectives. Okay, so I will look at those objectives and I will see whether each of those objectives are addressed in the result section or not. One of the objective of one of our paper was to assess the nutritional status of school children using the BMI. So first I gave the general characteristics and then I will describe the details of my first objective. Okay, I am not going to write elaborately on that. I'm just going to write a gist of it. And if reviewer wants to know more about it, direct him to go to a table. I am describing only the salient feature here, sir. If you really want to know more about it, kindly go to this particular table. There you have a lot of information. Okay, but the gist of information should be provided in the object. And this is another study where we try to find out, our objective was to assess the awareness about lymphatic filariasis and MDA is mass drug administration among the beneficiaries who take tablets and among the drug distributors. These 2 were our objectives and we have described those objectives in the very meticulous fashion. Okay, so what my point of description here is, whenever you write the results, they should get aligned with the objectives and each objective should be covered in your result section in a more meticulous fashion. And graphs. Sometimes people put graphs like this, table and graph together, and ask the reviewer, you only find out what I've written where, and it is your responsibility. So reviewers will get irritated looking at these things. This graph and this table, and I do not know what is this x-axis, what is this y-axis, and what these bars represent. Absolutely nothing. So such kind of graphs we usually do not entertain. And sometimes people put this kind of a graph where there is no legend. Okay, and axes are not titled, there is no title for the axis and we do not have the data labels, and simply 10 graphs of this kind are put and presented it as a analysis. Okay, usually we do not recommend these kind of graphs. So most of the time, by and large, the journals which are running under very cost effective fashion, they do not want authors to put too many graphs because it is going to cost them the money for color printing. Okay, usually we put the tables and graphs whenever very much necessary. Some line diagrams and box and whisker plots, those things which are required at very specifically, those things are usually concentrated. Okay, so when we do statistical analysis, we need to interpret that statistical analysis in a paragraph. I think I showed this table to you sometime when I was talking to you about the statistical analysis, inferential statistic. We applied Mann-Whitney's U-test here. I will describe down what is this table about. What is the table number 2 about? I write the description, interpretation of that particular table, and it is mandatory. I applied Mann-Whitney's test is mentioned in the statistical analysis section. Okay, and if you read the entire result, you don't find where is that statistical test applied, and you go to the table, there also nothing has been mentioned. So that irritates the reviewer. I'm telling you what are the common reasons the reviewers get irritated and reject our manuscripts. Okay, if the things are in line, they feel okay, fine, Achai is in the line of the required recommendation, so okay, we can give him a chance. Okay, so they will review your paper and they will submit the reviews, and if you comply to it, they may accept. And look at this. This is a bit complicated table. So we try to mention various parameters across the individuals with and without metabolic syndrome. So what happened here is, once this entire complicated table is looked at, the reviewer wants to read what all things are mentioned in it. So I write the description about that in the section which is relevant. Okay, so you read this description and then look at the table, or look at the table or read this description. So it is going to give more clarity about my paper. So this has to be kept in mind when you are structuring the tables. And this is another table for your exam. So we put the table, we do the statistical analysis, and we describe what is the interpretation out of it. Okay, and then we read about the discussion, we read about the conclusions, whether the conclusions are from the study. Please remember, when we are reading the conclusions, we want to see whether the author has concluded only based on the research findings. The research has been done on prevalence of tuberculosis or prevalence of hypertension, and the recommendation is something related to the policy. So the conclusion should be totally based on the results of the study. Okay, so that we want to ensure. Sometimes people would have not studied and they concluded this would have happened, something like that. So conclusion should be exclusively based on the results of the study, and the limitations are mentioned here. Authors are, categorically telling these are the problems, and limitations should be exclusively mentioned. There is nothing wrong in mentioning that these are the limitations. Plus, always be careful. The limitation should not be the primary objective of your study. I want to find out the prevalence of study in the rural areas, and in the limitation I will write, I could not find it because the rural area was not accessible. So, such kind of things, I'm just telling more exaggerated fashion. People put their primary objective as one of their limitations. So ensure that you read limitations twice, thrice before you commit on it. Finally, the list of references are to be very well structured. And the next component is, I'm just coming to the fag end of my presentation. Next is replying to the reviewer comments. Once the reviewers send their comments, please have patience, read them carefully. Take a deep breath. Every reviewer is not same. Every reviewer is having his or her way of expressing their thoughts. Okay, take it patiently. Sometimes, you may get very derogatory remarks. Usually nowadays, we do not send the articles to the reviewers who give derogatory remarks. We block them. Okay, please remember, if you are a reviewer and giving the comments, you have an eye, there is an eye which is watching your reviews. Sometimes what we do is, if there are 2 derogatory remarks, we remove those derogatory remarks and then take only the positive constructive criticism, then submit it to the author. Okay, so we have some autonomy in that. Okay, so sometime if it is not done properly, maybe you may feel a derogatory. My first article which I had submitted, I got a remark that your English is terrible, so you need to join a kindergarten school. So the remark, fine, accept it. And if you are too much going to oppose it, you need to reply to the reviewer in a more polished fashion. Okay, and you need to look at the paper and make feasible modifications. And remember, everything that is told by the reviewer may not be incorporatable. You may not incorporate, you may not modify it. At that point in time, whatever is feasible, do it. Whatever is not feasible, tell to the reviewer, I could not do it. Okay, and you need to document whatever you have revised in a template. Usually the journals will give the template where all you did the modification, that you need to tell them. Okay, and then while writing the reply to the reviewers, please use the polished term, because reviewer, if he or she has reviewed your paper, they have put significant amount of their time and energy in doing it, and most of it is in kind. 99.9% of the journal reviews are in kind. Okay, so they do not get any money. Okay, so that is the reason you need to respect their time and patience, and give them the gratitude. Thanks for reviewing my paper. These are all, when I'm reading my reviews are being addressed by the author, I want to look at these things. Okay, first point, thank you very much for reviewing my paper, sir, and thanks for your time and patience. And these are all my replies. So this gives a kind of a soothing effect to the reviewer when he is looking back at your paper. And this is more ethical, professional ethics also, and this is more important for us as a human beings. Okay? And if you are contradicting the views of reviewer, always support it with the documents and the literature. I'll tell you very fresh example. We wrote a paper to the Lancet Global Health very recently. One of the study team across the India, we wrote a paper to the Lancet Global Health. And the reviewer of Lancet Global Health has told us this paper is inappropriate for the reason that this has not been written in the as per the recommendations of CDC Atlanta. And when we went into that recommendations of CDC Atlanta, we did not find those recommendations on the public domain. And when we contacted the person from CDC Atlanta, they told that the paper is ready, the document is ready, but it is not put in the public domain. Okay, so when I'm writing back to the reviewer, I'm going to supplement it that this report is not in the public domain. Then you may ask me the question, how that reviewer came to know that there is a recommendation. The reviewer was a part of that panel who drafted that recommendation. Okay, so these kind of problems we usually face. Okay, whenever you are contradicting the reviewer, give it with the proper literature support and submit the revisions as soon as possible. Not morning you get the comments, evening you sit and write. No, take time and write it, but do not cross limit. Okay, no need to get disheartened if the article get rejected. So there are many, the world is big and there are a lot of journals and there are a lot of reviewers. Your article will get a place somewhere. And most important thing is flexibility is the rule. Okay, we need to be flexible. Animesh sir has taught us in our FAMER that only a teacher, an academician or a researcher will get successful only when there is an element of flexibility. If we are not flexible, not to the extent that you are going to bow to someone, but flexibility on a professional ground. Okay, that is most important as a researcher and a reviewer. And final slide is tips on acceptance of manuscript. Your study should be novel. You submit the study to an appropriate journal and there should be crisp and clear message, not too technical jargons, whatever madam was telling in the last session. Explicitly described methodology, appropriate statistical tests are applied, self-explanatory tables and graphs, and a comprehensive discussion and appropriate reply to the reviewer comments. These are the process tips for submitting, for getting a successful publication. So we discussed so far many aspects. One is how you are going to structure your manuscript, and then what, as an editor, what I look at, as a reviewer, what I will look at, and then what all things I want to concentrate when I'm reviewing the manuscript. What are the tips of successful acceptance, and how do you need to reply to the reviewer's comments. With this, I'm just going to end my session. I wish you all happy publishing, because publishing is an art and science that you need to learn, and it comes only with the experience, and to get that experience we need to do it. Okay, so there is a common saying in management science: first do to fail. Okay, so if you fail, you are going to success in, get successful in future. Okay, there is nothing called as the rejection. It's all part of the game. We need to take everything, digest it, and move forward. I thank everyone. I took a bit more time. I request Animesh sir to continue.
Thank you, Praveen. That was good and comprehensive. Let me start with mine, and we will try to give you a good overview about publication ethics. One sec. Is it visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
All right. So now, in the interest of time, I'll try to go, with some things in detail, and some things maybe I will try to just go a little fast. Okay. So going with this, now we are trying to touch upon misconduct in authorship and publication, and we will try to list and determine the good practices related to authorship. And then we will also try to give few suggestions and the role of institutional policy in preventing scientific misconduct. So I'll start with a case study, and this has been borrowed from one of my good friends, Sarah Jordan, who was earlier in Hong Kong University. and who I happened to meet and discuss over a couple of times when I met her in different conferences and other places. So this is like one PhD candidate who has to produce a paper presentation because the supervisor has asked to present in a postgraduate conference. Now, her research has not been going well, and she had thought that the hypothesis that she had assumed will be going fine, but then that seems not to be the case. In preliminary work provided by another laboratory, she did see the expected results, but in her own repeat analysis, these preliminary results were not confirmed. Now, she is worried that showing null findings in her research at such an early stage might lead her supervisor and others to believe that she is not a good researcher, particularly since the partner lab did not find these kind of results. They found something contrary. So she firmly believes that her hypothesis is correct, and she thinks that she will find evidence soon, but not soon enough to produce this poster. Now she is contemplating presenting the data and photos of the other lab's analysis as the findings of her own repeat analysis. She thinks the research was done, and I'm sure I'll find the same results. What harm could be there? She wonders. So, do you think that she is engaging in research misconduct if she does something like this? Is this a questionable research practice? And if so, what should she do? Should she tell her supervisor? What do the participants think? Yes? Any comments from the participant? Okay, so I get the
Yes,
data fabrication.
data fabrication.
Yes,
Again,
you
yes.
can respond in the chat, so it's okay.
Yeah, from the chat, I'm reading it out. She should
Okay.
tell her researcher, she should inform the supervisor. This is plagiarism.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, any other comments? All right, data falsification, plagiarism.
Right.
Inform the supervisor about deviation observed. Discuss and change the method. Okay. She should be bold enough to convey her findings. All right. Interesting.
Yes, so you're right that this is not appropriate. This is falsification, and then also in a way that you are trying to do something by copying somebody
Plagiarism,
else's thing. So
yes.
plagiarism, so that's true, and she should be telling her supervisor and then getting the guidance rather than being something like this and then trying to do all kinds of things which are not warranted, right?
There is another one that negative findings are also considered findings. So no point.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that. I would bring it up later, but yes, absolutely. So the aim of scientific research is obviously publication, which is a final product which gives visibility to efforts and contributions of all those who are involved in the process of research, and it helps in propagation of research findings. You would agree with me, right? And it was said by Faraday long years back that work, finish and publish. But now we have come to the culture of publish or perish. And especially in some places, it's actually true. So it's become a very bad thing, and because of that, a lot of things are happening, misconduct, frauds, and all that. Though there's no universal definition, it generally includes fabrication or falsification of data, plagiarism, unethical treatment of research subjects, and attempted or actual duplicate publication, and any and everything which goes with some kind of dubious, credentials and things which should not be ideally done, which may have questionable practices, ethics, and everything. Okay, so this is what. But more importantly, it is the deceit rather than honest error or naivety which is the key. So the whole thing is based on one particular thing, that is deceit. We are trying to deceive somebody. Now, why are these happening? These are happening because we have policies of human nature like ambitions, goals. We want to satisfy egos. We have greed with a natural desire for power, fame, respect, all kinds of things. And sometimes inadequate supervision. There is no proper guidance. There are not enough role models. And then sometimes even journal policies, especially with mushrooming of journals and things like that, where these journals, as I told you, are coming up and they will publish anything and everything, even sometimes to make money. One very important thing is compared to the punishment awarded, the incentive to cheat is much higher. That means if I do that, I get much more kind of benefits, or even though you might say that it's in the short term or not in the long run, but yes, I see those and I feel that, oh, what maximum will happen even if I do that, if I get caught. So that is one of the reasons again, which sometimes tilts them in favor of doing all these wrongdoings. So we will discuss scientific misconduct. Now, please remember, scientific misconduct can happen during research or even in the publication process. In the research, planning can be wrong, conduct could be wrong, the whole research is not conducted the way it should be, the analysis could be wrong, or the reporting of the research itself maybe, or mix of these things. But among publication, and today we are concentrating on the publication related scientific misconduct. So let's look at those. Now I'll give you some figures. This comes from Committee on Publication Ethics, a very premier body which is there for dealing with a lot of these issues. So it's called COPE, COPE. So they talk about certain things that they encountered. And if you look at the first four, that's like such a major chunk. And Dr. Praveen was talking about ethics approval. Now it's almost kind of mandatory and everybody knows about it. And even some of the conferences make it mandatory. He talked about the number and all that. Even some journals ask you to upload a scan copy. Why? Because again, I can give a declaration saying that it was approved by ethics committee, but actually I never went to the ethics committee. So that's why when you have to put the number, quote the number, or you have to upload a scan copy, it kind of decreases that practice, or there is a less scope for falsifying there. And of course, if you see falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism included, it becomes a huge chunk. So these are the issues. Now we'll look at some of these. So these are some of them. But Dr. Praveen also mentioned about conflict of interest in the ethics and research session. We also mentioned about it. I just touch upon conflict of interest. We'll look at plagiarism. We'll look at publication bias, and then we will discuss in detail about the authorship issues. So that's the plan. So conflict of interest basically is a set of conditions in which professional judgment concerning a primary interest gets unduly influenced by a secondary interest. Now, secondary interest could be anything. It could be a financial gain. It could be a non-financial. It need not be always financial. So getting a favor from somebody, getting into some good books, getting into a team because of this. So all these could be reasons. So that's the conflict of interest. It could be any of the things. It could be because of personal relationships or personal rivalries. It could be competition. It could be my belief, intellectual belief. And even sometimes if there is access to the data which is impeded, that also could be one of the reasons. And then all these are categorized as COI. Now, it leads to the integrity of the results may, to be questioned. And even sometimes it may result in it being viewed as promoting a particular product. So it's actually not inherently wrong. Conflict of interest is not inherently wrong, but it can influence the choice of research questions, the methods adopted, the recruitment and retention of participation, interpretation or the conclusion drawn, or the publication of data and the ethical review of research. And that's why it's important, it's pertinent that the researchers must disclose the conflict of interest and let people know that these are the conflict of interest which may exist, which Dr. Praveen also alluded to. So going to plagiarism, again, this is very important. Somehow we don't realize this whole thing, and it actually comes in right from very early point in time, or maybe an early age in school. And now with internet, it's very easy. We just copy paste, cut paste. Now computers have made it easier, and we don't realize the ramifications, and we don't realize that actually it's leading to our habit of getting into plagiarism without actually giving credit to people or the source. And that's what is plagiarism. So basically, if I pass off another person's ideas, processes, results, words, image, any other thing without giving credit, that's what is plagiarism. Now there are softwares. There are softwares which are available. There are universities and institutions which subscribe to it. The group of authenticate softwares and the cousin of that is Turnitin, that's routinely used. We have it in our university, so licensed version. So it's recommended that we use some of these softwares. Now, in the past, even after doing some of plagiarism, bit of plagiarism, it might have been possible to get away, but now it's difficult. So it's important that we don't do any of these plagiarism. So we actually attribute it to people or wherever the source it has been taken from. And it's important. And some of these are there, I put up. So we should look at actually attributing it. And how do we do that? Cultivate this habit right from the beginning, and we attribute so that we give due credit to people, even if simple things like, taking a particular say paragraph or some idea, some definition. So we should attribute it and make it a habit, and also tell our peers and our junior colleagues as well as students. Coming to publication bias. Now, usually what happens is studies with positive results, somebody responded in the chat saying that, so positive results actually have a more likelihood of getting published. Now, that leads to a biased evidence base because we will not see the negative results at all. And that's what the concern Andy had, because she had a negative results. Now, that doesn't mean that there could be some reasons for that. So we need to actually encourage negative results to be disseminated, published, and there are now journals which are for journal of negative case reports, journal which publish negative results and things like that. And that's one of the movements which was also started. In fact, a lot of things have changed now, and there is a likelihood of even publications which negative results, and then we try to learn from that or try to decipher why exactly did we get that negative result. It can, because positive results can sometimes even give us unrealistic estimate of drug effectiveness, which can ultimately harm the patients. Coming to the main things, that is authorship issues. Now, what is authorship? Let's get into that and the guidelines for that. So basically, it's a way of making explicit both credit and responsibility for contents of the article, and also to show who is the guarantor for integrity of the work as a whole. So all those people who are named as author, they are responsible for the whole thing, okay, for the academic, financial and social implications. And please remember, this applies to all intellectual products, okay, which constitute words, data, images, everything as a whole, whether it's a form of print or electronic publication, okay. So this comes from the sources that I have already cited there. Now, why is authorship important? Because it can give us a lot of benefits, including academic advancement, sometimes financial benefits, which comes in various ways, either incentives or more grants or something. Social, prestige, fame. Many a times it leads to more teamwork and collaboration because I have more publications and more authorship. Even sometimes there is pressure from external funding agencies, and that also sometimes leads me to publish, as well as also get me more and more collaborations. I'll just go into two more case studies before we go further. I'll quickly go over this in the interest of time. So there is a postgraduate, final year postgraduate, Dr. C, and who has been handed over the material because he was looking to present in a conference. So the head of department gives him some previous year's dissertation and says that, here, look at this, take table 228 and then make a paper out of it. So he sits whole night, or he goes through that and burns the midnight oil, and then comes out with trimming that whole thing from 97 references to only 5 references and makes a e-poster, shows that to the head of department, goes ahead and submits and goes to the conference, comes back with the prestigious best poster award. Very happy. Oh, my labor has finally given me awards. And then he goes and approaches the head of department and says, sir, now that we have done this and we have got an award also, I'm very much boosted, and let me publish this. He says, yes, why not? You're doing very hard work, you're sincere, go ahead. So they prepare a paper, publish, and it's published in an open access journal. Anything wrong? No, not really, right, on the face of it. Now let's see another scenario. There's an assistant professor, Dr. R, is due for promotion in few months. It's his unit had told that, yes, you have to publish something fast because that's one of the mandatory requirements from the regulatory bodies. So he prepared an article and subsequently submitted. This article was prepared from the thesis that he had done during his postgraduate time. So he sends it to the national journal of the specialty that he's in, and he's flabbergasted, bewildered when he gets the response a month later. And there's an email from the journal saying that an article with similar data and results has been published about 2 years back in an open access journal. He's just stunned, goes and opens and finds out this particular publication being referred to, and sees that it's actually published by Dr. C, who I referred to in the previous case study, and the guide and the head of department. And that's where it stands. Now look at these two scenarios. It's very much possible. Of course, permutation and combination of this is possible as well. But if you look at this, what has happened? C has published it without naming this person, Dr. R, and he is not got any credit. He's not an author, though actually the work was done by him. So there are issues, right? I'm sure that you understand that there are issues and this can actually happen. Now, yes, you're right that, we lose faith because of such behavior, and that person who had actually done the research did not give permission. Yes, I agree with all these things, right? So that's why we need to understand about authorship, and I'll go into the main. But please remember, even Cochrane reviews, we talked Cochrane reviews brief, that was the concerns it sent me. Yes, within the time we could touch only on that. But please remember, there has been, in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, they said that actually there has been prevalence of honorary and ghost authorship even in Cochrane reviews. So let's again look at who is an author. And Dr. Vijay Lakshmi had told you already about this, but let's go over this for a quick revision. Somebody who's made substantial contribution to conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. Mark my words, I'm using it, I'm emphasizing specifically. Contribution to conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. There is or. And drafting the article or revising it for critical intellectual content, and final approval of the version to be published. Okay. And then there is the fourth clause, which was added later, agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any work, any part of the work, are appropriately investigated and resolved. And please remember, this follows a all or none phenomenon. That means you have to fulfill all criteria. You cannot just say that I took part in the first few phase and then I drafted, or maybe I just saw the final. No, you should ideally take part in everything, and you should fulfill all criteria, including taking the responsibility. You cannot say he or she put my name, I have no idea. That cannot be, again, that I was not consulted and my name is put. Please also remember, stringent as it may seem, ICMJE, that is International Committee on Medical Journal Editors, talks about that these criteria are only to give credit to those who deserve credit, but not intended for use as a means to disqualify somebody from authorship. That means if somebody had actually been a part of it, don't deny them that opportunity by not letting them meet the criteria number 2 and 3, right? It's not that, now I will not never consult and say that, see, you never participated. I will keep it hidden, and then go ahead and publish and say that you never participated. All right. So that's important as well. Now, again, corresponding author has a very important role. Of course, all authors have, but in corresponding author, he or she is responsible for all communication that happens with the journal during submission, peer review, publication process, and should ensure that all the administrative requirements of journal are met. That person is also responsible later if there is a query or anything, then that person is again able to address it and then bring it to the notice of all the authors and get a consensus, respond. That brings me to some other practices which are there in authorship. One is gift authorship. As the name suggests, it's gift. That means you're gifting somebody an authorship. That means giving an undue credit. That person doesn't deserve, but you're gifting an authorship. There's another thing known as ghost authorship. Now, who's a ghost? Is ghost visible? No. So similarly, to remember this, please remember, ghost author is an author who's actually taken part in doing things, but finally you do not cite that person, or who does not get credit. So when the authorship names appear, that person does not appear to be in the author's list. And that's why failure to list those people who deserve authorship becomes a ghost authorship. Guest authorship. Again, what we are doing is by additional experts who owned a favor, so then we are giving them a guest authorship. Again, coercion or pressure, it's all form of giving undue credit. Now you are trying to give a guest or gift inclusion of a senior, usually a senior person, because of undue pressure. Put me, your HOD, your some say principal, dean, whoever, and you are kind of obliged to do that because you think that if you do that, maybe you will be in good books or whatever gains you may have, or you're pressured, or you don't have a way and you don't know how to refuse. Then there are things like fragmentation or salami slicing or salami publication. That means you're cutting it down into breaking it into smallest unit. I'll go into that in the next slide. Then dual submission of same manuscript or duplication, that's also there. Now salami publication is also known sometimes as Bologna or trivial publication. What we are doing is a significant piece of research, you're cutting down into least publishable units. Basically, just to increase the number of publications. Yes, if you have substantial amount and then you think genuinely it can deserve 2 or 3, that's fine. But don't break it into 5, 10 or something, because you just want to break it down into the least publishable units. And somebody has to see them 2 or 3 together to get the whole idea of it. Because what happens is this practice may distort the value of the work by increasing the number of studies that appear to support. So again, the evidence space may be distorted, it may be skewed. It also wastes the valuable times and resources. How? Because it is reviewed, it's edited, and then people have invested time. People also buy journals or subscribe to them. And then again, we are trying to skew the database also. Similarly, there is something known as redundant and duplicate publication. Now there is similar kind of word which is used. What happens here is sometimes you have the findings which have been published elsewhere, but you're not giving a cross reference. Sometimes it could be even my own article. So that becomes a self plagiarism. Though you might say that it was my own work. Why do I need to? I am the author. But once it is published, there is a copyright. Even if you have the copyright, please cite it. It's all right. So you need to do that, because what happens is you take a publication from this publication and then you don't cite it. Many a times it's unintentional because of lack of awareness. So that's why it's important that there is transparency. And sometimes people submit the same study to 2 journals, sometimes not necessarily at the same time or simultaneously, but even later. And that also counts as duplicate and multiple publication, which is again unethical. It's not supposed to be done. So who should not be an author? Where do you draw a line? Now I've given obviously some exaggerated scenarios like holding the door and getting samples and things like that. Technician whose job is to analyze samples, and so who's not taken part in whatever I have given you the guidelines of authorship, either in the conception, acquisition, interpretation, or drafting, finalizing and taking responsibility. Even a statistician who's not been involved in other than just analyzing the data, you need not actually make that person an author. But if you've consulted right from the beginning, conception, always been going, taken their help, even in analyzing, interpretation, yes, and then involve them in the writing, you can give them credit of authorship. Even a person who signs for your funding or something, or processes your application or forwards it, need not. Okay, so they all deserve mere acknowledgement. That's all. Okay, but there are sometimes people who do not justify authorship, may be acknowledged, so you can do that, and even as a group you can do that. But please remember another thing which has been told, that ideally it's an ideal scenario that even when I'm acknowledging somebody, I should obtain their written permission, because I may just do that, or I may sometimes acknowledge people and people do that also. You drop in some big names by acknowledging them, and that sometimes also weighs on some reviewers. So you need to actually ideally take permission from people who you want to acknowledge, and they should know. Again, they should not be caught by surprise, caught unaware, and that's a good practice again. Now, how do we prevent this problem? Encourage a culture of ethical authorship. Encourage authors, both young and old, to read at least one book on publication ethics. A written departmental or institutional policy also helps. Then also we better discuss the authorship right at the start of the project, have a meeting with team members if possible face to face to know their views, and then decide on that, or say that depending on the contributions and these are the things, this is what is the authorship. Decide authorship before each article to be started and confirm the decision if required in writing, who will be doing what and by when, and depending on that you go by. Again, coming to the order of authorship, many a times there is a lot of concern about that. Now please remember, what happens is authorship goes by mutual understanding, but generally it is by relative contribution to work. All authors, if they contribute equally, then you'll have to devise a way. If you agree that everybody has contributed equally, it could be alphabetical, random, or whichever way. That is again mutual understanding. Now, if they want, authors can even include how the order was decided in case such a equal contribution there. There is also a concept which has come up now that you have joint first authors. You might wonder how, but then you can have a footnote saying that both have contributed equally or something, and both are jointly first authors. Now, let me also tell you, many a times here in India, we think that first author is the most important author, whereas sometimes if you look at the Western side, the last person is the most senior author, and many times the person responsible or the guide. Okay. And another thing which we go by in our institution, and just the guideline which is there actually is generally is the person that is the postgraduate or the person like PhD scholar who does the work should be ideally the first author. Now, please remember, editors have the right to question about authorship and what has been their contribution. They may even ask what is their contribution. If they feel, they can even suggest to remove some of the names. And some of the journals even restrict authorship because they think certain things like case reports and all should not have more than certain number of authors, because they think that sometimes they feel that probably it may not do justice, and that's why. I'll just give you guidelines. Again, please remember, these are guidelines which come from K. Satyanarayan, who was erstwhile editor of Indian Journal of Medical Research, one of the premier publication from ICMR. Okay, so he says that I quote, sequence is determined by the relative contribution of authors to the intellectually most critical aspects of the study. And he suggests greatest weight should be given to the contribution in step one, that is the conception, design of work, analysis, and interpretation. First authors should have ideally made major contribution in step 1 and 2. Okay, that is drafting, revising critically important content, and the first, as I mentioned. And the sequence of other authors should represent progressively lesser contribution. This is an ideal scenario. Again, as I said, it has to be by mutual agreement. So as long as there is mutual agreement, there should not be a scope for disagreement. A word about ethics committees, because a lot of that has been said earlier and even earlier today. Please remember, though it's good to get ethics committee approval and all, but just because an ethics committee has approved the work doesn't mean that the work is ethical, because that's only so much. After that, what's gone in and what's happened, and that may not be the case. I'm just saying there could be issues. So BMJ has actually rejected studies which they found unethical, even though they were approved by ethics committee, BMJ being the premier journal, British Medical Journal. So they say a study is not ethical just because it has been approved by ethics committee. And these are some of the bodies that can be actually looked at. These are all available. CIOMS, WMA, Consort Guidelines, ICJME, ICMJ, sorry, WAME, that is World Association of Medical Editors, and COPE, which I also, and COPE has very beautiful case studies which you can actually look at. They actually document every year the case studies which come to them for resolution. The editors and others write to them, and they provide you nice description of the case studies and what they have advised, what was taken, action was taken, and things like that. So very good learning material. So to conclude, don't take things that aren't yours. That means don't plagiarize. Play fairly and share everything, as we are doing now, sharing our knowledge and expertise, whatever we've learned, and we are also gaining knowledge in the process by interacting with you all. So thank you. With this, I'll conclude, and we will, as I said, we will have some time for discussion now, though we have overshot a bit, but I've tried to bring it on track and then kept it to the minimal, as I said. We will have now discussion. You're free to put your thoughts in the chat box and we will take questions. So thank you so much. with this, we have concluded 8 webinars in the series, and we will have one more additional on your request. That's on qualitative research, which is scheduled on Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Sir, shall we open up the discussion?
Yes, I think we can do that. But before that, let's take something which is on the chat.
Yeah, sure. One common question most people ask is, what is the minimum percentage of plagiarism which is acceptable?
Good. So ideally, I would suggest that it should not go beyond 10%. Most of the good universities insist on 10% or less. Ours also does that. Okay, so 10% would be the, maybe it can maximum be 15%. I'm not sure, but 10% I would say is the, and that is the similarity index we are talking. And again, some of those things, again, we can look at that. What are the things which are being picked up? But 10%, I would say. Praveen, what do you suggest as an editor reviewer also?
So 10% is a ideal level.
Yes.
And some journals, some journals have put
15.
the 15 and fewer 5 also. 5%.
Yes, stringent. That's why I said 10%, but 15 it can go up to. And again, we have to look at what are the similarities.
Similarity.
Yes.
And there is a point about the continuous words also. Some journals have got different continuous words. The UGC recommends less than 14 continuous words.
Okay.
And, yeah, few people say less than 5, no, less than 10 continuous words. So
okay.
Usually when we put there is one question coming up also on what are the softwares. You also mentioned, sir, like Turnitin and all.
I have shown in the, yeah.
They are going to give an elaborate report on the plagiarism, where they are going to mention the source from where the information has been taken, and they give very colorful interpretation. So that is going to tell us whether how many words are continuous and all those things. So it is easy to.
Okay. Free plagiarism checkers, there are quite a few, but then again, they have their own limitations. They are not as good as the paid versions. Of course, they do their job, and then, sometimes, but there have been experiences, and not immediate recent, but then I have had experience when you go to 2 different softwares, you get 2 different results. So that's also there. Praveen, you might have something to add on that, maybe?
The issue with these free softwares is they give a trial run for 15 days or 30 days, and then you have to go for the paid version only. So
that's
it's always good to ask your institution to buy one so that multiple users can use it. If you're not part of an institution, it's always good that you go for an individual this one, depending upon how much research you're doing. I mean, the number of publications you come out with each year, you'll have to plan. Different options are available.
Right.
Yeah, ma'am. Actually, I think that is enough. Lot of information is.
Taking a picture from a book or other article and add it to my manuscript, do I have to take a consent from original author or journal? Or is it enough to write the citation or reference of that picture? It's often a confusion, actually.
Depends. Where am I like putting it up? Am I putting it in my publication? Am I putting it in my work, which is probably coming as a book or something? Then I would suggest to do that. But if I'm doing it for a presentation or a class, I think I mean, I'm not very sure, but I think if I'm giving if I'm using it in the class, definitely I'll mention the source, because I may not be like able to get every time that the permission from the publisher and the authors, and since it's in a limited audience.
Sir, can I say something?
Yeah, please do.
If the figure or something has been taken from the book, if the book is in the public domain, so we can cite the reference of that particular book, but citation is mandatory wherever. If you take from a published books, or if it is an e-book or something, citation is mandatory. And if it is a totally copyrighted issue, some of the books will mention at the end that nothing from this book or the document should be put anywhere without taking the permission from the primary authors. At that point in time, we need to write to the primary authors and get their approval. Then we can put it in the paper. But by and large, citation is mandatory.
True, very
Definitely.
true. Yeah.
No, and that copyright issue, what you said is absolutely true. And then many times, like, we have to look at that as well. So copyright is a big issue, and then that can even go into a lawsuit. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes.
Anil, there's a
Yeah.
nice question which many people ask, and I think many people have this doubt. So here, Deepthi is asking: is checking for plagiarism mandatory, even if I have used my own words in most places on the article?
I would recommend that it's good idea to actually look at, but then if you're very confident, that's a different thing. But I would suggest that it's a good idea because it always helps, and sometimes we may not realize it. So it's always good to look at the similarity index using one of the softwares. What's your take, Praveen?
Here, I would say it's
Oh.
not just words, even for the ideas. Even ideas can be plagiarized. So plagiarism is check is still required.
No, that's true.
Yeah, my point is, if the author says I have used my words, what is a guarantee for the reviewer? I am editor. How are you going to give objective evidence for that? For that, you need to give me the plagiarism certificate. If you don't check it, I will check it. Sometime the editors will check the plagiarism. That is one of the component of technical review. They will check the plagiarism and they will send the article back to the reviewer. Even though author, whenever I may claim that I have used my own words. The point is it should be objectively proved. And how are we going to prove it objectively? It is through the software checking the plagiarism. Okay, always it is better to have the documentation and then claim that I have done it from my end. So that is more important. We always go with the evidence.
And as you said, even if I do it, but the journal will definitely do it because it's a part of their process. So they
Their
will do
process.
it. I mean, whether I do it or not, but they will do it.
They will do it.
Definitely. I think
And they will let me know what is their result also.
There was a question I think I saw somewhere. Consequences of plagiarism, one of the things. So consequences can be many. It starts with even depending on how your institution treats it. There are policies. We have very stringent policies, and then again first offense and repeat. And then you can even have some journals will be like they will never publish your thing again. They will blacklist. It doesn't usually happen even with once, but then depends on the journal and journal's policies. The other thing is that's again uh, depending on what level and how much it is. Again, it has its own repercussions. One question I saw just now when I was just seeing, I think, can I put my previous institution's affiliation even if I'm not working there now? Is it ethical? So I think that I would not really recommend. And why would I like to do that? Because if I'm not really with that institution, I mean, I didn't understand what could be the reason to do that. If I'm not really with that institution to put that affiliation. In fact, that will be, in a way, I feel my personal thought would be that I'm not really revealing the truth, or maybe falsifying, or maybe I'm looking at some kind of a benefit to get out of that affiliation. I'm not sure. Yes, other questions? Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Rashmi, any questions? Anything that?
One more question is there. Some journals ask for suggestion of reviewers. What
Yes.
if we do not know experts?
Oh, very good.
So, yeah.
What?
What if we do not know experts in the field?
Okay.
Or whom to suggest basically.
Okay, so I feel that when they ask, please, two things you should remember. One is that whatever you give, it's not necessary the journal will contact only those. Okay, they may contact anybody else also. You might give, but then that's there, and many of them have that in the format. At the same time, if you're suggesting, please also be aware. Try to give people who are actually working in that field if you can. That would be a good idea. Okay. Second thing is, try to avoid people who you have worked with, because many times they look at, if I have worked with somebody, my colleague or somebody who have authored a paper within the last couple of years, they do not want, because then they know that there is possibility of again conflict of interest or maybe biased, and so these things I can think of. If you don't really know, And if it is mandatory, then I don't know what should you do. Probably you'll have to check, because obviously you would have referred to certain work and then you would know in that area. So maybe you can suggest if it's mandatory, but if it's not mandatory, then you can leave it blank.
There's
But
another question.
communicate.
Somebody is
should
asking,
communicate.
can there be a conflict of interest for a reviewer?
Yes, it can be. Anybody can
Yes,
have conflict of
definitely.
interest.
Yes.
Yes.
In
I'll
fact,
give,
Much more than
Animesh,
for
I'll
a
take the question.
okay. Yeah. Oh, please take.
Yeah, in fact, whenever we review any article, there is a clear statement there where they ask you, do you have a conflict of interest? So in that case, we have to declare the conflict of interest, and we can return such an article that no, I will not be able to review. So conflict of interest is definitely there for this particular stakeholder as a reviewer also.
I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
It happened once from somewhere, and again, one journal as well as again for some other program fellowships and all. I keep getting reviews requests, and it happens to be sometimes that you happen to know that person or maybe the institution, though it may be blinded. Sometimes you know just from the description of the whole thing in the methodology. Sometimes that is not blinded, and then so I have written back saying that this is what, and then I am part of this thing institution, or this is from a sister unit or something like that. So please guide me what. So it's always better I declare rather than just keeping it to myself. And many a times they will either say that okay, don't do it, or they'll say I've also had, go ahead and do it because you are one of them. We have 3 reviewers and yours is only one of the views. We will take that into account when we get all the 3 reviews and decide based on that, because ultimately it's the editorial decision. You're just recommending, but you must declare. The thing is, as I said, there's nothing wrong with conflict of interest, but you must declare it.
Okay, there's a very interesting question. Majority of institutions don't have an actual ethical committee. How does it affect the student?
How does that
affect the student?
Okay. As I understand, ideally there should be in every institution,
Yes.
and they must constitute, and now it's mandatory. And all the institutions must have it, and then we should have that. But in case they don't have it or whatever reasons, then as I told in the other presentation when we were talking about research ethics, you will have to come for some other neighboring institution with an understanding with them, and then you'll have to go with that, because otherwise it will have lots of issues with the research that the students are doing, right from sometimes even acceptance in the university to presentations in conferences sometimes, and definitely in publications. So these are the issues which can be there. And I would strongly suggest and recommend that there should be an ethics committee established. There should be SOPs followed, and they should go on with that. It's also in a way training and teaching the budding researchers and future faculty members or consultants to go the right path. So that's very important, and I would strongly recommend that.
Yes, actually nowadays all research activity, including those done by postgraduates, require to undergo the ethics committee approval. So the question of an institution not having an ethics committee or a research protocol not undergoing ethics approval actually does not arise. Like Dr. Animesh mentioned, if the institution doesn't have, there has to be a MOU. Otherwise, any research coming out of that institution would be questioned. So okay, there's another question about authorship. Postgraduate dissertation publication after they leave college and join another institute. So, what would be the affiliation? And which institute would they give credit to? When they're mentioning their authorship affiliations, what should be?
So affiliation of that person will be the current affiliation. If you want to further say that formerly or something is different, but I would say that affiliation has to be current affiliation. But in the methodology, you will say where the work was done, and there you have to mention. And again, in the acknowledgement, in the end, you can always mention that you can thank whoever, the department, the institution, or whoever, and where the work was done. But affiliation will be my current affiliation. So if I moved out from that my previous postgraduate institute to a current institute, I will give affiliation as my current affiliation. This is how I understand.
Okay, I think this question probably Wait, I have lost the question.
Okay, till you get
Some-
that question. So there's
Yeah, okay,
nothing
got
wrong.
it.
One Mona
Yeah.
Abul Siod has put the question: is it wrong to put double affiliations? What I understand is, if I'm already, say, for example, I'm also an honorary faculty for FAMER. I may be, some other visiting faculty, so I can put that. There's nothing wrong. As long as I'm doing it, I'm putting my primary as well as other affiliations. That's all right. In fact, many of them now visiting faculty are putting their visiting institutions affiliations as well, so that's okay. I mean, as long
Yeah.
as I'm not
Yeah.
doing anything wrong.
True,
Come to
very
that
true.
question,
Also,
please.
yeah, also if we are member of some specific committee, for example, like in my simulation lab, so it's important to put up that you are also a member of that, because that particular unit also requires visibility. So it's important to, acknowledge your affiliation there also. Okay, so the next question.
Especially if I'm doing a work in that area, like, say,
Yes,
for example,
exactly.
medical education work, and I'm a medical education unit deputy
Convenient, yes.
coordinator, I would rather put that also, because
Yes.
that way what happens is, that also, and in that field, and then again my visibility of that unit also increases, so that's important.
Okay, so the
And
next
it's
question.
essential that the concerned areas get their visibility. The reason is even the NAC is considering those points.
Yes.
So it's important.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
if you've done a study in one place and then you leave that place and you're publishing it from another place, it's always good to mention formally so and so in this place and currently what you're doing. Both you can show. There's
Yes, you
nothing
can
wrong
show.
with
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, one
that
more
was a
question.
question. There was a question, Rashmi. Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, there's one more. Sometimes the article may be rejected and the reviewers' comments are not shared by few editors, even on request. What can be done in such a case? Praveen would like to answer
Okay.
that?
No, I'll answer before he does.
Okay.
See, you cannot do anything if they've not shared. You cannot really do anything, right? That's a plain fact. But it would be good again that because again, to add to what Praveen said, that be gentle and kind to reviewers also, even though they might be sometimes harsh. It's my practical experience. Of course, in the interest of time, I'll cut it short. But please remember, all the almost all, let me say, almost all the reviewers are actually doing an honorary job. They don't get anything out of it. Okay, they don't get any money, and they're investing time. They're investing their time. They're taking so much of efforts to make your paper better. So that's why you need to be kind. But at the same time, if somebody has been unkind and they've not given you comments, and sometimes there are comments which are not really, say, constructive criticism, which I mentioned last time. So just move on. I mean, if and the journal has been harsh, maybe try to move to another journal, because I am very happy if they reject with promptness. Second, if they give me good comments, I'm very happy. I have no problem with the rejection as long as it's prompt and it's given me enough of food for thought or maybe to improve. And I've had 6 rejections and a very good paper published in a Elsevier journal, so I'm okay with that. But I want some comments. Praveen, your take.
Yeah, in fact, the more the criticism, the better. The article gains strength as we take the reviewers' comments and go on working on it and making it better.
Yeah, sir, absolutely. Whatever you said is fine, because we can't do anything when it is the right of editorial board to either reveal or not. But it is better the editorial boards reveal.
Yes,
Reveal what are their opinions about it. And I
absolutely.
supplement the answer with one of the other question that has been asked. If the editorial board itself rejects our paper at the beginning, morning I submit the paper, evening I get rejection, what could be the reason? The reason is your paper does not come under the scope of that journal. Number one. And number two is the journal has got similar other papers in their database. And number three is the journal already has load of articles. Okay, I think Animesh sir would have received this message from one of the National Journal of Community Medicine, nationwide journal. They mentioned because of COVID overload and because of lack of the reviewers, we are not going to publish any of the articles related to COVID-19. So such kind of things will keep on. So there are 101 reasons that are there with the editorial board itself, and they are going to take the decision based on that. If these are the 3 common reasons, if the article is sent at morning, comes back at evening, these are the 3 reasons that we should think of. Go for some other journal, submit it.
Okay, there is multiple times using Grammarly software. Is it recommended for checking grammar? So what do you think? Any experience with that?
Grammarly is nowadays being widely used. A lot of people are using it, and it is going to give you the tautology, and it is going to tell you where all the problems in the framing of questions. I think there is nothing wrong in using Grammarly. It is going to give you the better idea about grammatical errors.
Okay, what are the other questions? Multicentric study, is it mandatory to have approval from all the institutes? Yes, I think it will be required. I don't think the institution should proceed with that without it. Any other questions, Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Rashmi? Anything in between or anything that came to your attention?
Views on publication charges.
Okay. Is there any regulation regarding
charges
this?
Are very high. Is there any regulation? Yeah.
I don't think there are any regulations for that. It all depends on the editorial board that is going to decide how much they are going to charge. And it also is dependent on the popularity of the journal. The journal which is very popular, they tend to have more. But there is, I have not seen any regulation or a law that is going to decide or controlling the publication charges. I haven't seen it. So it is a prerogative of the editorial board to decide on it. And there are very good journals which are free of cost. So
yes,
we have both kind of scenarios.
Absolutely true.
There's something on null finding publications. I don't know what is this. Can Dr. Poonima, can you unmute yourself and ask this question?
Is she there? Dr. Poonima?
Just seeing if we can unmute Dr. Poonima.
I'm working on that.
Unable to.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Hello,
so
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thanks to all the speakers for an excellent series of presentations. I really appreciate attending these and learning from all of you. What I was trying to ask with that question is, a lot of times people are afraid to present null findings or negative findings. And I think now, because one of the biggest challenges is a publication bias when we are doing systematic reviews, which has been a biggest challenge for me as a systematic review person. So some journals have started to provide a separate section for null hypothesis or null findings to be written in a very short abbreviated version. So I was hoping that if you can speak a little so that others are aware that they should consider publishing even if they have negative findings, because ultimately it's going to affect how the reviews happen in the future, and the whole issue of publication bias is never going to go away if we are not going to address that.
Animesh sir, will you speak about
I mean, I don't really know. See, the thing is, as I know, and I was trying to see if I could actually, I know some of the journals, and offhand I can't remember, but there are journals which actually now let you publish your negative findings. One of them, as I said, Journal of Negative Case Reports. There were some more, and there are, so these journals actually let, but then I do not really know how exactly, like, to answer the question that, or answer the.
Can I take this?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Poonima, for asking this question. I think Animesh sir, during his presentation also, he has made a mention about it. The point is, every author should keep in mind that none of our results are predetermined.
Yes.
I'm going to start my research with any predetermined results. If I do that, then my whole research is biased. And in the process, I may get some results which are contrary or which may not be same as that of the current biological plausibility. Okay. At that point in time, do I say that my research is not worth publishing? So the message that has to go very clear, I think that's what Dr. Purnima is also talking about, is if we do not get the results in line with the current biological plausibility, or we fail to get the so-called p-value statistically significant, at that point in time, we should never hesitate in publishing our research work. And nowadays, even the journal editors, for example, some indexing agencies, I was going through the regulations that are sent by Scopus to our journal and also PubMed. There is one section on whether you publish the studies which are having the contrary results to the current knowledge. Okay, if we are doing that, then we are going to get additional points. But the point that I keep in mind when I am submitting this paper to the reviewers is the negative or the contrary or not significant results should have come following the correct methodology. The methodology should be correct, state of art. And in spite of all that thing, if we get the negative results or not so significant results, as a journal editors, we should not have any hesitation in publishing those papers in our journals.
I just saw one more BMC group of Journal of Negative Results in Biomedicine is also there. I was just checking some. So that's also publishing negative results. Okay, any other one or two more questions that we can take?
There's a question, why do journals ask for signed copyright form before acceptance?
Because it is a guarantee to them.
Yes.
It's a guarantee to them, number one, that all the authors have read the article and reviewed it. Because I send a paper, I'm a postgraduate student, or I will just put everybody's name in my department and I'll send it. And what is a guarantee that everyone have read the article and given their remark? Number two, when I'm publishing somebody's research in my paper, I want to take a commitment from them that I have got the rights to publish his paper, his research findings, and later on he cannot sue me in the court of law that this journal has taken my research and published it. I want to have, that kind of a security with me before I publish any paper. This is as simple as you register your house when you purchase a new house or new land. It is as simple as that to the editor.
So I think by now we have taken almost everything that was there, is it? If so, then is there anything that has been left? Can we withdraw the article if the journal doesn't respond to many mails? Okay. Yes, you can, but then please ensure that you have mailed that effect, or if there is a, so keep that communication as well. If I can take a minute to share one of the experiences. Now, what happened is, like, one of my colleagues, he had withdrawn the paper apparently, and then he had sent it to another journal, and it's after that journal finally accepted it and it was published. About 2 months later, when the previous journal came up with the issue, that also published this journal. Now, for the people who don't know, they will think that it's a duplicate submission, duplicate publication. I saw that and I went to him, and then he showed me and he opened his mail. And luckily, he had that mail with him still. He had written twice to them and they never responded. And he said, since you're delaying it so much, it was almost 1.5 to 2 years. And he said, I'm withdrawing this paper. Similarly, we had an experience where one of the journal editors, even after personal communications, meeting, calling, all that, this particular person never responded and then kept saying that, please wait, and it never moved from editorial review. But after 3 years, and fortunately for us, we said, okay, we'll just wait for some more. So after 3 years, it got published. So it depends if you think, but as I said, if you're withdrawing, please send that communication clearly and repeat, and then keep that communication. Because in case they've not responded to that communication also, tomorrow, in case you publish elsewhere and you might not have realized, but then you might land up in a suit. So I think it's been exhaustive. It's almost 9:45.
Almost done. Almost all the questions are answered.
9:45. So I think it's, we thank all the participants, and even after so long, if you all are there, that means that the kind of interest that you have. And thank you so much for all your support. And it's been really wonderful to have you all there with us all these years, while for so many. And we have one more last one coming up, as I said, on Monday. So that Praveen will take you through the essentials of qualitative research, right? So,
Thank you,
Dr. Sriharsha.
So
Yeah.
thanks everyone for your energy and enthusiasm, and a big thanks to Dr. Sriharsha and Dr. Bhargav for hosting this series of webinars for us.
We should be thankful to you actually. Dedicating 8 sessions is not a small, but it is a. I understand you must have undergone a lot of pains in preparing the presentations. I mean, we are really grateful. For accepting our request, and we waiting for the 9th session on June 8th, and probably then we'll make a closing remark.
Right.
Reserve it.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Most exciting
you.
session is still awaiting all of us.
Yes.
We all are waiting.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Hopefully.
With
Thank
all,
you so much.
energized Praveen. Yes. Thank you.
so much.
Thank you all. Good
Thank
night.
you. Sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good night.
Take care.